So we went to kindergarten, first grade, and second grade.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We went to one classroom in first, and then we'll hit another one when they're out of KSI.
Yeah. So what I noticed in all 3 grade levels was that the students were able to articulate what they were learning, why they were learning it, and how they knew they were successful.
That's awesome.
And in some cases, that was without having a visual representation of the learning intentions and success criteria on the board. So why would I bring that up? It suggests that the students are clear on their learning, and it didn't need to be visibly posted. And so that's, in some cases, leaps and bounds above other schools and districts, because in some programs, without it being posted on the board, no one has any idea. So it means there's an inherent culture in those classrooms that focuses on what we're learning, why we're learning it, and what success looks like. On the flip side, what was really fascinating about the students that couldn't answer that question. So there were a collection of students that could not answer it with much depth. And that had to do more with the tasks they were being asked to do and not the learning that was expected in the classroom. So in one classroom where I approached 2-3 individuals working on a task, the task did not have much rigor. And so when I asked them what they were learning, why they were learning it, and how they knew it was successful, their answers reflected the depth of the task, not the nature of the learning. And separating that out is going to be important, because it's not that the learners don't know, it's not that the learners don't want to know, and it's not that the learners aren't engaged. What that indicated is that what we're asking them to engage in during literacy block may need some additional rigor to show them more relevance behind what's going on.
Can you define in your terms that you're using it in this context what rigor would mean to you?
So rigor, so we wrestle with this all the time, right? Because in many cases, people believe rigor is louder, longer, and more of the same. Mm-hmm. So my class, and I'm going to pick on our high school colleagues, high school teachers believe that rigor is, I gave them 97 problems for homework, and I only had 2 A's last year because I'm a rigorous teacher. Actually, that means you're a bad teacher, but that's a different conversation. Rigor is not just louder, longer, more the same. It's a combination of difficulty, which is effort, and complexity, which is the level of thinking. And so what that allows us to do when we take rigor and look at rigor as complexity and difficulty, it means we can make adjustments to things like the complexity, but leave the difficulty the same. Mm-hmm. So I can still ask them to, and we can do vice versa, by the way. We can mess with one and not the other. So we can take sight words and have them still recognize sight words, but change the difficulty of the sight words or ask them to do something with the sight words that's more complex. Mm-hmm. So everyone is still working with sight words, but I've adjusted the tasks for individual students. Some are going to have to do compare and contrast. Mm-hmm. What do these sight words have in common with those sight words? How are they different? I'm still doing sight words, but the level of thinking involved has gone way up. Mm-hmm. I can also up the level of difficulty. So I'm still doing sight words, but now I'm going to ask them to look at more difficult sight words. But they're still just looking, so I'm keeping the complexity the same. I'm just upping the difficulty. In one of the classrooms, they had learning plans where they were asked to pick 2 tasks from a choice of 6. There's an opportunity to mess with difficulty and complexity. So you could have one student who picks the one in the upper right-hand corner, and another student picked the same task, but they look very, very different because that student's at a different level of complexity and difficulty than this student, and so they are still doing the activity on penguins, and I'm just pulling this straight from memory, but the penguin activity looks different because of the student's level of readiness. So the task looks the same, but what's being asked of the student to do in the task is different because I've either changed the thinking or I've changed the difficulty of it. So what did you all see?
Ms. Kelly, you start.
Well, I think that Number one, I want to say we did see some really good things. All right. I kind of focused in on cognitive engagement a little bit because that's the problem of practice here. And I think that Dr. Almarode's already spoke to that. I personally did not see high cognitive engagement, but I think that was due to the task that the students were being asked to do. So I think that's the big thing that popped out to me today.
So let me try to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. For us, as a next step, you would recommend that we specifically look at the task and trying to get across the rigor divide.
I think you continue to do that during your PLC times, because I think that's what's going to make the difference with the students being able to answer those questions and understanding really what they're learning and meeting them where they're at, which gets back to that differentiation as well.
And that brings out a big positive in what I saw. Every one of the tasks that the students were asked to engage in those classrooms was evidence-based. There wasn't anything that we observed that I think any of us would have said, that's not best practice. So that's not the issue, right? The teachers are using best practices. The only thing we're talking about now is take those best practices and ramp it up. And this is a good problem to have. Because if you were experiencing, or if students were engaged in tasks that were not best practices, that's a whole different conversation than take the best practice and up the expectation, up the rigor, cross the rigor divide, as John Antonetti always references. And in some cases they were ready. One example I noticed in kindergarten is that there was evidence on the wall that kindergartners could write sentences. Now, I don't know the story behind the assignment because I was only in there for a couple of minutes, but there was evidence on the wall that those learners could write complete sentences. And in almost every case, we could read the sentences and understand what they were saying. So then the task they were doing that day when we were observing needs to come up a notch because it didn't align with what they were already demonstrating ability, proficiency, in some cases mastery in doing. That's a good place to be because it means you're now cranking up the volume, not changing the DVD, to use an analogy.
I want to say that there were great structures in place in all classrooms.
Yeah.
The structure is there. And kids were engaged in things, but were they cognitively engaged in certain areas? And the two things that Kelly and I discussed were the differentiation piece and the cognitive engagement. So I agree with everything that you said. But wow, to the structure and the task that you're talking about, getting deeper on that rigor divide.
And I think it's so important as a foundational piece is to have the right structure in place, or it just undermines anything you're trying to do, and so.
Sometimes that's the hardest part, is getting the structures in place, and once you have them in place.
Right. Yes.
And I think we talked about this earlier in the morning, but it's worth repeating. If there are not structures and transitions in place, then there's not a single strategy in the world that will survive a classroom.
Totally.
And I think we overlook that. We get so hung up on, are you doing compare and contrast? Are you doing Marzano's? Are you doing Danielson's? Are you doing Hattie? Are you all these things? And they're hanging from the rafters.
Right.
Well, that's not going to, in your case, the transitions are smooth, the expectations are clear, there is clearly positive behavioral interventions in place. And so now it's all instruction at this point. They know what to do when they don't know what to do, and the teacher's not around. So there's even self-regulation involved.
Yes.
So now it's time to take advantage of that, and I don't mean that in a negative way, and push those little suckers right on across the finish line.
Yeah. Ms. Parker, let me ask a few questions here. Like, from your perspective, getting to change from second grade classroom, from fourth grade to second grade, and then now to this, what was sort of some of your takeaways?
be more specific.
Okay, like what do you see? You know, what has opened your eyes in your experience getting to see K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and not just your perception of what's probably going on in whatever grade, but actually getting to see what is going on. I mean, how's that been for you?
It's been very interesting. I think, like everyone just said, the structure and everything is really in place. And there are pockets of things that vertically are close to being aligned, but are not quite. Like the writing that I've been working on and stuff. It's just, we're very close. Like you said, there are great things in place, and the couple of things that I see where the work needs to continue, we're close.
Good.
That's true.
That's a big time takeaway.
Very good.
Y'all want to say anything? Or are we ready to? All right.